Hello and welcome to part 2 in a 9-part series on assessment. The first part is either earlier in the long playlist that's just assessment, or if you're starting this on the part 2, there is a part 1 playlist as well. And part 1 was released in 3 videos. Part 2 will be released in 2 videos. And this focuses on the types of assessment and reporting that are available. So first we'll look at different stages of assessment in student learning when we apply first formative and then summative assessments. Then in the second part, or the second video for this part, we will look at different types of reporting for norm-referenced and criterion-referenced skills before we get a preview of the remaining 7 parts of the series. So first, the stages of assessment and learning. Everybody needs time to learn content. It's very rare that people get things the first time, unless it's a relatively simple concept building on concepts that are very, very solid. So in these earliest stages, this is what we call the formative assessment. So in traditional direct instruction, this is when the instructor has talked about it in theory and is maybe doing the first example or two. It can go beyond that. So these are not generally used for final reporting, or at least if they are, they're not heavily weighted. This is when the student is figuring it out. And before we start applying things to report cards or final grades, those students should have the opportunity to sort it out and make sure they understand. Later stages are where we get the summative assessments that show up on report cards and other final evaluations. From the student perspective, that formative assessment is their first exposure to the skill being taught. This is where they need to be able to have a try-fail cycle. See what works, see what doesn't work, and come to that understanding themselves. They need to have plenty of opportunities to make and learn from their mistakes to have a comfortable learning environment. If every question they answer counts, then there's stress right from the beginning when they don't have a firm grasp of what's going on. Now, this stage does include homework. This is where they are practicing. And that opens up bigger questions. First of all, should homework contribute to report card grades? Well, generally speaking, formative assessment shouldn't be included, or if there is no alternative to get the students to do it in practice and we haven't found some other motivation to get them to do homework other than putting it on the report card, well then we need to put it in there, but put it in lightly weighted and find some way for them to have a try-fail cycle where they can recover from mistakes. Lately, I've personally been using a lot of online websites for the homework. In the math classes I teach, I use iExcel and CK12 for some of the assignments because those are really good at adapting the level of the question within the skill to how the student's performing. It will give them easy questions at first and build them up to the more difficult questions should the student prove ready for them. Delta Math and Khan Academy are 2 other sources that I use. They stay at a pretty consistent level, which is more like the testing level, so it's good for students to practice there. They can also redo the assignments over and over until they get the score that they are looking for. And even beyond that, I give students more assignments to pick from than they need and just look for a certain accumulated score so that they have that try-fail cycle and they are lightly weighted on the report cards. Now, how much homework is the correct amount? Cognitively speaking, we just need to interrupt the forgetting cycle and make sure that we are reinforcing and ideally retrieving it. So Monday's lesson should not just have homework due Monday. We want to space it out for a few days. Let them try more Tuesday. Let them try more Wednesday. Retrieving that information is actually essential for cementing it into the memory and moving it out of working memory through the medulla oblongata and into the neocortex and through the hippocampus into the neocortex. I might have forgotten the brain organ. Uncommon Sense Teaching is a fantastic series on Coursera.org for this. Highly recommend it. to all teachers. Now, does the homework need to be done at home? Not necessarily. Homework is not important because it's done at home. Homework is important because it's done independently. So calling it homework is a bit of a misnomer. Independent work is the important piece. And how much they need to do, well, if you do more than 10 to 12 questions of a given type in math, for example, in a 24-hour period, that's not going to help. So doing 12 questions in one day isn't much different from doing 50 questions in one day. You really want to space that out. Doing 50 questions at 10 questions a day for 5 days has a huge impact. And if possible, it should be done under the instructor's supervision. First of all, if we can catch mistakes and misunderstandings early, then we can correct the understanding and get it sorted out before that misunderstanding becomes habit. And second, when homework is done outside of a proctored situation, then we run into cases where it's not the student doing their own homework. It could be older siblings, it could be parents. These days it could be apps or Google searches. There's a lot of ways for them to get answers without doing it themselves, and that does not help the students learn. Now, from the instructor's perspective, formative assessment should be used to guide instruction. So you can ask students questions. Do you understand this? Who has questions about this example we just did? And use that to form the instruction as we go. One of the reasons in the classroom I prefer to use a whiteboard to slides is because with slides you only have so many prepared examples. So many of each type, maybe one of each. With a whiteboard, I can gauge how the students are doing. I'll do a couple examples myself, and then I'll put an example, let them try it. And depending on how quickly they do it, what proportion of the class gets it right, how confident they seem, I can use those factors to decide how many more examples of that type we need to do before we move on to the next type of question. So when the students show me that they understand it, we'll move on to the next example. If they need more time, we can give them more time. So that's how we can adapt. If we know the student group as a whole is strong in one type of example, but weak in another, then I can give more examples in that type B that they're weak in to help them solidify and cement that understanding. The summative assessments are used once the formative assessment stage is complete. So we've done the explicit instruction, we've done the homework, ideally even done a practice test or given them the opportunity to do so. And then we do the test that actually counts or is more heavily weighted for things like report card purposes. So summative assessments are the primary source of final reporting. These could be chapter tests, unit tests, midterms, finals, the class presentations, essays. That's the big one. And in the next lesson, we will look at the different types of reporting.